Richard Linklater is back to rotoscoping and in triumphant fashion. The American filmmaker has a different penchant for making films, which has been shown numerous times in his diverse filmography. However different the works are from each other, they all have one thing in common: a longing soul, waiting to go back to a forgotten era or revisiting a dissolved memory. No one does it better than Richard Linklater. With Apollo 10.5, he outdoes himself. Loosely based on his own memories, the film recreates the burgeoning 60s and 70s in Houston, America, a place where science fiction came to life. The center of America's space revolution affected the lives of each and every person in NASA's vicinity. Through Stan, our protagonist's eyes, we see a changing world in every expanse of life, culture, food, science, cinema. Nothing remained as it was, except for constants like middle-class frugality and the indelible hypocrisy of political democracy. Linklater and his team do a wonderful job bringing all of that back to life in a 40-minute-long montage that is easily the best part of the film. A case could even be made for that specific montage becoming a film of its own, and a pretty good one at that, too. Considering what's going on in our world today and how adversarial the image of everything in our minds is, Apollo 10.5 attempts to bring some calm over us. Becoming a part of his plot-less adventure is a soothing feeling, often lost in today's fast-moving and commercialized art form. The vivid detailing of Stan's life in Houston is upended by the part that follows the montage. Stan, a 10-year-old boy, was chosen to man a lunar capsule that NASA miscalculated for the Apollo 11 launch. Hence, the name 10.5. But was this mission real? Absolutely not. Real in the minds of kids growing up in America, especially Houston, in the 60s? Definitely, yes. Wouldn't that have been the fantasy of every kid from that era? That is what Linklater captures so beautifully through the film. His nostalgic experiment, though, is more than just harkening back to one of humanity's greatest achievements and the challenge of a changing world. It transcends those bounds in a bid to reconnect the viewer with oneself and others around them. Stop here and ask yourselves a question. Can you recall a peculiar detail about everyone and everything that matters to you in the world in a moment's time? Can you describe the things around you that you have seen all day long without looking at them again? The age of self-absorption and consumerism has made us walking zombies. We have almost forgotten the ease of living in a normal world where the world's problems didn't matter much as long as we had each other. Sure, technology has made it easier for us, and it probably would have been lapped up by the kids back then if they had an option. But the point is that they got by, and got by happily. Visually, the film is flawless. The imperfections in the frames make it more appealing than computerized digital iterations like it. The beautiful coloring fills the screen with vibrancy and such warmth that it is hard not to get lulled. Linklater finds rhythm in the most mundane of things. He makes them worthwhile, the sole focus of our attention. As well as describing it all from Stan's childlike perspective, Linklater often warps the animation to give it a surreal feel, like a distant dream, showing not just how Stan experienced those events, but also how he remembers them. The animation and editing teams deserve all the credit for their ingenious work on the film. The best part about Linklater's message is that it is all under our control. Our choices dictate how we will remember the time spent here when we look back at life. Apollo 10.5 might be, on the face of it, tailor-made for American audiences in the same way that Malgudi Days was for Indian kids. But does that make either of these any less enjoyable for us? Probably not. Finding a film this impactful is rare. Years from now, it will be remembered as a classic. Arguably, the best film I have seen. If cinema is one of the few art forms where you have to use more than one sense to experience it, then Richard Linklater's Apollo 10.5, A Space-Age Childhood demands that you immerse yourself completely. And really, it's not that hard to do. The film is set right on the zenith of the space race and revolves around the 1969 Apollo 11 moon landing, told through the perspective of a boy. Apollo 10.5, A Space-Age Childhood is inspired by Linklater's own childhood in the Houston area and those of his friends and family members. In this way, the plot is incredibly exclusive. It is the mission to the moon aspect that makes the film truly universal. Here is everything you need to know about the ending of Apollo 10.5, A Space-Age Childhood. Visually, the animation in Apollo 10 and a half, a space-age childhood resembles Linklater's own works, Waking Life and A Scanner Darkly, but it is much more playful here than in the older two films, reflecting its narrative. The film begins at the playground of the Ed White Elementary School in El Lago, Texas, in the spring of 1969. The narrator of the plot is Stanley or Stan, Jack Black. His younger self, Milo Coy, attends Ed White, where two men in suits and sunglasses approach him. They take him to a secret location and tell Stan that his country needs him. They are apparently from NASA and have built a smaller than standard lunar module, in which only a boy of Stan's age and size can fit. As the space race has heated up, they need to test their machines and calculations one last time before the Apollo 11 mission. So, they have decided to use the smaller module and send a boy to the surface of the moon. Stan, being pragmatic, asks why they are not sending a chimpanzee instead. One of the NASA officials, Zachary Levi, exasperatedly tells Stan that between the chimpanzee and him, he knows more words of the English language. NASA is apparently impressed with a few of Stan's science reports and the fact that he has won not one, not two, but three consecutive annual Presidential Physical Fitness Awards. After Stan agrees, the other NASA official, Glenn Powell, tells Stan that everything about the mission will be secret. Stan's training will start at the end of the school year, under the pretext of him going to a summer camp. He can't obviously tell anyone about this, including his family. Right when Stan is about to throw up during his training, the plot shifts, and the focus is suddenly on his home life. The film heavily depends on the narration. It is the driving force behind the plot. The older Stan reflects on his life in the late 1960s. His father, like many adults in the neighborhood, works for NASA. He is the head of the shipping and receiving at NASA, while Stan's mother attends grad school and takes care of the family. Stan is the youngest of 6 siblings. He has 3 older sisters, Vicky, Jonna, and Stephanie, and 2 older brothers, Steve and Greg. Stan's father is incredibly frugal and often ends up becoming a source of embarrassment for his children. We are introduced to a remarkable assortment of other character groups: people from Stan's neighborhood, his grandparents from both sides, his father's colleagues, Stan's friends, and other members of his baseball team, to name a few. Amidst all this, in one of the turning points in American history, Stan and his siblings grow up. The film spends nearly 50 minutes exclusively exploring various facets of Stan's and his family's lives, before returning to that moment when he throws up. Older Stan claims that he went to the moon in secret in a mission called Apollo 10 1/2, while the rest of the world waited with bated breath as the day of the Apollo 11 mission approached. Does Stan really go to the moon? Does the Apollo 10 1/2 mission really take place? Stan is our window to this beautiful world that Linklater has created. It just happens to take place against the backdrop of one of the most important eras in human history. We see the first ever moon landing unfold through the eyes of a boy with a fertile imagination. He hears the talks of everything that is happening around him and absorbs it like a sponge before letting it all out in the sphere of his own creativity. During one of the lazy days at the playground in front of his school, Stan weaves a reality in which he has been approached by 2 government agents, asking him to step up when his country needs him. Stan spends his time at Camp Grizzly, an outdoor camp outside Lake Traverse, Michigan, thinking about the training of the astronauts. He has read about it enough, and heard about it enough, to have a superficial idea of how everything happens, so he envisions himself training for his upcoming launch. He even imagines traveling to the moon and back. After all, space travel had been attempted before, but that recreation in his mind lacks the details of his other imaginations. It is only when he witnesses the journey of Apollo 11 on television that the void in his imagination gets filled by the information he receives. This includes the landing and Neil Armstrong's walk on the moon. No, Stan really doesn't go to the moon, nor does the Apollo 10 1/2 mission really takes place. He is the representative of millions of people all over the world who watch as the moon landing takes place and picture themselves inside Armstrong's suit. The moon landing wasn't just an important milestone in terms of history and science, it also expanded the scope of our collective imagination. In the American context, it was the culmination of the prosperity and progress that the country has experienced since the end of World War II. While the film is teeming with nostalgia and wistfulness for a bygone era, it doesn't shy away from depicting the other prevalent issues of the time, from the Vietnam War to the assassinations of several political leaders to the civil rights movement. However, as older Stan admits, he grew up in a suburb, and all those aforementioned things didn't really exist for most of them beyond the news programs on TV. The only exception is Vicky, the eldest of the siblings. She is quite aware of the state of the world at large and seems to have formed a political opinion significantly different from her conservative parents. Stan and his other siblings only become bothered with politics when people appear on TV and criticize the Apollo 11 mission as excessive for a country that could have spent the money on things closer to Earth. Stan and the others get irritated by these opinions, and their feelings are then confirmed by their parents' dismissal of the critics. But even Vicky, who agrees with the critics, looks on with wonder and hope as Armstrong descends from the module. Like Stan, she too, perhaps imagines herself walking on the moon. What does the meaning of Apollo 10 1/2 title? To understand the meaning of the title, we must first understand the narrative. The Apollo 10 1/2 mission isn't real. The entire thing, from meeting the two NASA agents to training for the mission itself, has been imagined by Stan. Because of his father's job, he has more knowledge about what goes on in NASA than most children of his age in the world, even if he thinks his father's job isn't glamorous. Stan envisions that he has been selected to be the astronaut on the Apollo 10 1/2 mission. During the Apollo 10 mission, which was conducted between May 18, 1969 and May 26, 1969, the astronauts descended in their lunar module down to about 8.4 nautical miles, 15.6 kilometers, of the lunar surface. The Apollo 11 mission, taking place from July 16, 1969 to July 24, 1969, was the historic mission that finally took humanity to the moon, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the surface. Stan envisions himself going to the moon as the astronaut for the mission between Apollo 10 and Apollo 11. What does Apollo 10 1/2 title signify? The title of Apollo 10 1/2, A Space-Age Childhood, signifies that the entire film revolves around the imagination of an elementary school boy. Richard Linklater, the film's writer-director-co-producer, came up with the idea while making Boyhood. The character of Stan is loosely inspired by Linklater's own childhood in the Houston suburbs. The experiences of his siblings, friends, several other people residing in Houston at the time, also play a crucial role in the development of the character. Stan is told by the NASA officials that recruit him that they have built a lunar module that is smaller than what is standard and can only be operated by someone of Stan's age and build. Its smaller size of it also plays a role in the name. 1/2 has often been used for things involving children. For instance, in the film, Stan's frugal father claims that some of his children are less than 12 years old when he doesn't want to pay half of what he is supposed to at the tick counter of a drive-in theater. Similarly, the half part in the title refers to the fact that Stan is less than 12 years old. Is the Apollo 10 1/2 mission real? No, the Apollo 10 1/2 mission isn't real. It didn't happen in real life, nor did it happen within the narrative of the film. The Apollo 10 mission took place between May 18, 1969 and May 26, 1969, and Apollo 11 mission took place between July 16, 1969 and July 24, 1969. There was no Apollo 10 1/2 mission in the intermediate period with an elementary schoolboy as the astronaut. What we see unfold on screen is actually Stan's incredible imagination. His father works for NASA, as do many other adults in the neighborhood. The moon missions and space race are part of his everyday life. It even forms the core of his imagination. He envisions himself being chosen by NASA to go on a lunar mission and imagines his time at the Grizzly Camp, a summer camp located outside Lake Traverse, Michigan, as the training period. Understandably, there are gaps in his imagination as there are gaps in his knowledge. This is especially true when he initially envisions lunar travel. That changes as he watches the Apollo 11 mission live on TV. As the Apollo 11 module lands on the moon, Apollo 10 1/2 does the same in his mind. As Neil Armstrong walks on the moon and collects samples, leaving footprints on the lunar dust, Stan imitates him in his mind. he and his siblings have spent their day in Astroworld, a theme park in Houston. As he slowly falls asleep, his imagination transforms into a dream. His father wonders whether Stan witnessed the walk on the moon so that he can tell all about it to his grandchildren someday. His wife assures him that he will, because that's how memory works. Unbeknownst to either, Stan continues to dream about the moon, perhaps like tens of millions of others around the world. Did Stan really go to the moon? No, Stan didn't go to the moon either. The character was inspired by Linklater's experience as a child in the Houston area in the late 1960s and those of his siblings, friends, and several other people who lived in Houston at the time. He stated in an interview that he first came up with the idea for the film in 2004, adding, "It was while I was making Boyhood when I first thought about it, and I was like, that was an amazing time to be a kid. That's when we landed on the moon. And then I remembered this fantasy I had of this kid in space, kind of ridiculous. I mean, in the tangible world, it's ridiculous, right? But it's with a kid and I actually had that fantasy." Is Apollo 10 and a half based on the true story of Richard Linklater's life? Apollo 10 1/2. A space-age childhood is partly based on the true story of Linklater's childhood. Linklater wrote and co-produced the project besides directing it. He revealed in an interview that he first thought of the idea in 2004, adding, "It was while I was making Boyhood when I first thought about it, and I was like, that was an amazing time to be a kid. That's when we landed on the moon. And then I remembered this fantasy I had of this kid in space, kind of ridiculous. I mean, in the tangible world, it's ridiculous, right? But it's with a kid and I actually had that fantasy." It's such a privilege to get to make a film that not only recreates a moment in time, but also recreates footage from Houston in the late 60s, the Bernie director elaborated. And so it's that same kid fantasy of Harry Potter or Princess Diaries or something like that, where the bigger world kind of needs you, so it's a childhood fantasy. Not only are you chosen, but you're needed to save or help our country. It's funny, but the trick in the movie is to play that very straight. Although Linklater admitted that Apollo 10 1/2, A Space-Age Childhood is an embarrassingly personal film, he clarified that it didn't mean that Stan was his doppelganger. Stan is actually a composite character made up of the experiences of Linklater, his family, and his friends. He filled up the gaps in his memories by speaking to his siblings. Moreover, Linklater didn't attend Ed White Elementary School, nor did his father work for NASA. He wanted to make an entertaining movie above everything else, so he drew from the lives of people beyond his family. For instance, producer and Linklater's friend Mike Blizzard attended Ed White. His experience there was used while developing Stan as a character. The movie was predominantly developed at Robert Rodriguez's Troublemaker Studios in Austin, Texas. However, Linklater and his team made use of numerous videos sent by people that lived in Houston in the 1960s. Clearly, Apollo 10 1/2, A Space-Age Childhood is based on Linklater's life to a degree. It also draws from an assortment of other sources to create a wholesome narrative. This is the end of explanation. Share your thoughts in the comment box.